Welcome to Bled Talk, the podcast where insightful conversations meet language learning. I'm your host, Samuel Bledsoe, and on this show, we dive deep into a variety of topics with fascinating guests from all walks of life. Whether you're an English learner looking to sharpen your language skills, or simply someone who enjoys thought-provoking discussions, Bled Talk is something for you. From engaging interviews to solo episodes filled with knowledge and inspiration, join us as we explore the world one conversation at a time. Get ready for a journey of learning, curiosity, and meaningful dialogues. Welcome to Bled Talk. Here we go. Welcome everybody to Bled Talk. This week we are talking with Stephanie, the English coach. She has her own company, which is English Full-Time, and she teaches English. She helps people with their pronunciation. She does so many great things. And if you have a chance to find her on, I think it's Instagram, YouTube. Do you have any other ones? Facebook?
Yeah, TikTok. I'm everywhere.
All of them, right? So, and I'll make sure to have those in the description as well for you guys to find her and watch her videos. But we're going to talk to her this week. We're going to ask her a little bit about where she's from, and hopefully she can give us some good tips on how to improve our English, our language, and just move forward. So, Stephanie, could you go ahead and tell us a little bit about you? Kind of where you started and where you came from.
Sure. Well, first of all, Samuel, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. This is really exciting. I'm very happy to be here. So where am I from? I'm from California. I was born and raised here. And I want to give a little backstory because I feel like it's super important for people to understand, my full story, the big picture. But my parents were immigrants in the U.S. My mom was from Argentina. She was born and raised there. So I felt, growing up here, like I was missing a little bit of my culture because I was not raised with the language. My mom was a native Spanish speaker, and I grew up only speaking English. My dad is of German descent, so he grew up speaking German, but he was also born in Argentina. And as a child, he grew up in Argentina and in the U.S. So I did have a little bit of that American ness, I guess, in my family, but also there was a lot of Argentine culture, and there was also the German culture, a little bit of everything. And you know what, I have to add something here because sometimes I get comments from people. They're like, "Oh, your dad was German in Argentina." I don't know if you know the stereotype, but so yes, my grandparents, they were escaping Germany during World War II because obviously everything that was happening there, they didn't want to be a part of it. And they were trying to draft my grandfather into the Hitler Youth. And when that happened, my grandparents were like, "No, we're getting out of here." And so they had to flee the country, and they went to Argentina because I believe they had like open borders. They were letting people come in. So that's how their family ended up over there. So basically, I tell people, like, I come from a long line of immigrants. And growing up in the US was really strange because clearly I'm white. My language, my native language was English. And when I would tell other kids, "Oh yeah, my mom is a native Spanish speaker," they'd look at me and be like, "But she's white. You're white." Like there was this assumption here that if you're white, you can't be a native Spanish speaker. So I grew up with a lot of complexes around who I am and what I am and where I'm from and where my family's from. And honestly, it just created this big hole in my identity where I felt like something was missing and I wanted to go find that thing. I wanted to pursue that thing. And so for me, it was Spanish. I felt like if I just had the Spanish language the way my mom has it, I could have a more complete identity, and I wouldn't feel weird because I didn't feel American like my American friends. I felt different. I had a different family life, a different family culture. So I pursued, learning Spanish. I learned it in high school. They actually sent me to a class with native speakers, and that was an amazing experience because I had that immersion experience from the get-go. The whole class was in Spanish. I understood nothing, but in a few months, I was able to really pick up a lot and understand. However, that class also did something bad for me, and it made me feel like I had to pretend I was more fluent than I actually was. So I developed this weird way of just being shy. I'm not naturally shy, but in that class, I pretended to be shy so that I wouldn't have to speak, so that people wouldn't hear my mistakes. And that carried on into my adulthood when I was learning languages, and I had a lot of anxiety around speaking. And sorry, I know my story is getting kind of long. I'll try to wrap it up quickly.
It's okay. Go ahead and tell the story.
But basically, then I studied in college, and my mindset was, if I can major in Spanish, then I can get fluent. Surely with a university degree, I will become a fluent Spanish speaker at the level that I want, with the vocabulary that I want and everything. And it just wasn't happening. I was doing all the Spanish classes. I was majoring. What I wasn't doing was anything outside of that, which I know now is so important to become a proactive, independent learner and really, take control of your journey. Don't just rely on the class, but do things outside of that. And so then I studied abroad. I got accepted to the study abroad program in Argentina. And I went there. It was an amazing experience. That was 2013. I met my family family members I had never met before. I saw the country that my mom was from. I traveled around. I even met my husband there. And then we just decided to live there for a while because the study abroad trip was 6 months. And I was like, this is not enough time for me. I love this. And so we kept living there, and I was really learning the language, but still struggling with the confidence element, the fear of making mistakes. It's like I had the Spanish grammar so perfectly in my mind and so structured that I couldn't break outside of that. And as you know, native speakers don't always follow the rules, and they have their own way of saying things. And I was so by the book, textbook like, and then trying to speak the way the natives were speaking. So it was a whole journey, basically, to finding myself in the language, my identity. And thank God I don't struggle with those things anymore, the confidence issues, the fear of making mistakes. And I feel like I get my identity now. Like, I get it. I'm like a daughter of immigrants. That's why I had that blended culture that I grew up with. And now I've lived in Argentina, so I really understand that culture, live here in the US. And now it's like I've put all the pieces together, and it doesn't bother me anymore, and I don't struggle with those things anymore. But it was a whole journey getting here. I guess that's my story.
No, that's a great story. That's very good. No, that's awesome. I had no idea, and that's something interesting that you brought up about. You would tell people that your parents are immigrants, that that nobody's from the United States, and yet the people almost didn't accept that. And that it's interesting because I now that I'm thinking about the things that I've been through, the kind of experiences I've had, I think that's not even just a California thing. I think that's really a countrywide thing because in the U.S., I think that unfortunately kind of just also became part of our culture of we just expect that anybody who doesn't speak English, who's not native, is also not white, and it's totally not true. There's so much more to it. And here in Brazil, it's kind of the same thing. You were talking about how in World War II a lot of people left, and I didn't know a lot about that before I came to Brazil, but I actually live in the southern part of Brazil, which is right next to Argentina, and so they had the same type of thing. There's a lot of communities in southern Brazil that speak German, actually, because they have that German ancestry that came from I guess that would be like the 30s and the 40s.
Yeah, I learned about that in southern Brazil, there's actually like really big German or communities of German ancestry.
Mm-hmm. And they kind of keep that culture alive. And I think it's really cool because, they do Oktoberfest, they do a lot of other things. I went and visited one that's a very famous place here. It's called Gramado, and it's a really cool city, and it's built, their architecture and things is very similar to the European style, and it's really interesting. But I really loved your story, and I would love to know how did that experience? So you kind of you took us from childhood to how old would you say you were about when you went to Argentina? Maybe in your 20s?
I was 22.
Yeah. So you got to adulthood. You're in Argentina, and how did you decide what you were going to do from there?
Yeah. So creating English full time. And I'm going to be very honest. And I'm always honest when I share this story because everybody has a different story, and mine may not be what people expect. It's not like, oh my gosh, I love teaching English. I knew I always wanted to teach English, and so I studied it in college to become an English teacher. It's not that at all. Not at all. So basically, we were living in Argentina, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, the economy there is unstable. And I was very afraid of getting stuck in the economy because my parents immigrated from Argentina. They met and married in Argentina. They moved to the US. And I think they didn't go back to Argentina to visit their family for like 30 years. And I just thought my heart is going to break if I can't see my family every year. I'm a family person through and through. Like, I need my family. So, and my husband's family became my family too. So it's like, I need everybody, but we're on opposite sides of the earth. Like, how am I going to make this happen? So I just realized I need something that's flexible. I need to earn enough to be able to fund this lifestyle where I can see my family. Like, seriously, that was my end goal. I thought I want my kids to know their grandparents because I did not grow up with knowing my grandparents. I saw them a few times throughout my lifetime because they were worlds away, And I didn't want that for my family. So I'm like, look, there's this thing called the internet. I know people make money online. I just have to crack this code. I have to figure out how to do it so that I can have this lifestyle that I want. Like, I started with a problem. And then I went from that to 2 to 3 years of research, like deep research every single day, obsessed about how do people do this. And I read books on blogging and I was like, maybe I'll become a blogger. And then I was like, no, I don't think I like that. And then I discovered this thing about, being a coach and creating courses and learning about that. And then I thought, well, oh, that's great, but who's going to listen to me? I was like little Stephanie, 23, 24 years old. I wanted to be a life coach back then because, I was really into goal setting and habit forming and going after your dreams and stuff like that. And I still am. But I was like, I don't know if anybody's going to listen to a 24-year-old life coach. So I was like, I need to find something, a skill that I have that I can continue improving and offer to the world. And who's going to listen to me? Where do I have authority, already established? And I was like, well, I learned a foreign language, to fluency. I am a native English speaker. I've been speaking this language all my life. I studied in universities. I know that I have a high level of English. I have a background in writing. What else did I think? I'm taking you through my thought process, like everything that I thought. And then my background in teaching. So when I was living back home before going to Argentina for the first time, I worked in high schools and junior highs, teaching, tutoring, substituting. And then I developed my own private tutoring business where I would tutor all kinds of subjects. People really sought me out to work with their kids or work with adults. And that business was going great. So I was like, okay, clearly there's something there. Clearly I can teach. And then I have this language thing, I speak English and I also learned a language. So I put it all together and was like, I'm going to help people learn English. That's what I'm going to do. And then it went from that, and that was several years ago, because I think I incorporated my business in, oh my goodness, when was it? 2016? Yeah, I think 2016. Wow. And then it was just like trying everything, like, oh, how can I make this work? And multiple failed programs in the beginning because I wasn't really sure what people needed or how to market the programs, how to get students in. So there was a lot of hard work in the beginning. And then finally, it's like, I feel like I cracked the code on some of it. I figured it out. And then ever since, I've just kept my head down and I've been working and building courses and just keeping the cycle going. And now I have a family. I have my 2 kids. And we do what I set out to do. We go travel to Argentina every year if we can. We couldn't do it during the pandemic. And they get to grow up in that country and in this country with their grandparents over there and over here, with the language over there and the language over here. So it's like I'm reconstructing for them what I would have liked, I guess, for myself.
No, that's awesome. That's interesting because that's going to be the situation for my son as well, and any future kids. Is my wife, she has her family here, but they kind of live on the other side of the country, and so it's difficult to see them. It's difficult to visit. But like I told her, because in her mind she was like, oh, we can go to the U.S. and we can just put Brazil kind of in the past. And I was like, but I don't want to put Brazil in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I like it or not, the United States is where I was born, but Brazil has kind of become this
Your
other
home,
part
yeah.
of my life. It's not, a lot of people will talk about these chapters and things. Well, Brazil it got introduced in a chapter, but it's going to
Part
continue.
of your
Yeah,
story.
it's going to continue being part of the whole book, and so I can't get rid of it, and I don't want
Yeah.
to. And like I
Yeah.
said, I love that you brought up, kind of raising your kids in both cultures and having them understand that, because that's what I want for my son. I really don't, as much as I would love for him to be happy and be, the proud American, I also want him to be happy and
Yeah. And
that.
yeah, and I'm aware also that, okay, so I'm trying to do for them like what I wish I had, but then they're going to have their own struggles and their own identity issues. Because, for example, with my cousin, he grew up in the US and in Argentina, and he said something I'll never forget. He goes, I have an accent in every language I speak. He's like, I don't speak English well enough for people to think that I'm from the US. I don't speak Spanish well enough for people to think that I'm a native here in Argentina. And he also speaks French or German, I don't remember, because he lived over there for a while. And he's like, and I don't speak that language well enough. He's like, I have an accent in every language that I speak. I don't sound like a native speaker in any language. And I just thought that was so interesting. It's like I feel like every single person goes through some kind of identity crisis where they're just trying to figure out, who am I and what do I believe and how do I fit in the woven fabric of this life with my family and their beliefs or their culture versus mine, and how am I the same and how am I different? So yeah, that I'm so glad though to say I went through it and I don't struggle with that anymore, because it's a rough
It's
time
hard.
when you're not sure where you fit in or how you see yourself.
But it's also hard because sometimes we grow up thinking that we're one thing and then kind of find out that that's not who you are. And I think a lot of times people, when they think about who they are, kind of visiting this topic, they think about what makes them them, but they don't think about what all they can do to create themselves.
That's a good one.
I say that because, for a long time, I'm from the breadbasket of the United States. I'm from the central part where we don't really have a lot of people from outside. There's nobody wants to go to St. Louis unless for like business. And so, I'm from cornfields and soybean fields, and I don't have the ocean. I don't have any big tourist attractions. And I thought, I'm just this, Midwestern guy from the US, and that's me. And I used to even think that the Midwest didn't have a culture, but then I started to realize there's a lot that we have in each part. And even talking about accents, I always tell people all the time that if you listen to people from the US speak, every region has an accent. They have a way that they talk. And for some people, it's a lot more difficult. For example, my mom, she's from the South. And so there's a lot of accent that comes from the South that's very difficult for other people. And if anybody's ever been up Northeast, you know that it's also very difficult to understand what they say. And so much different stuff there.
I just posted about that today, actually, like how all the accents are different. When I teach based on my accent. I'm not going to try to go teach general American English or anything. It's just like, if you like how I speak, this is what I teach. But it's interesting what you said about, you just felt like you were some guy from just this place. Like there's nothing special about you. And I think a lot of people go through that. I know I went through that. Like so many kids told me growing up, but you're white. Like you're just white. And I was like, I'm just white. Like, that's all I am. There's nothing special about me.
Yep.
There's nothing incredible. If you're from this is what people also, I think, don't understand in the US for kids when you're going through, school systems and stuff. It's like all the kids around you are special because they're different. Like, oh, this kid is from this place and this kid is from that place. And so we compare because we're human. And then you look at yourself and you go, well, what's special about me? And then I was angry at my parents for not teaching me Spanish. I was like, I could have been special. Like, that's what I was thinking, probably in my subconscious. I didn't have the words or the understanding to put it into words back then. But yeah, like I was mad at them. And it took me a long time to get over that and realize like how life happens. And yeah, sometimes passing on a language is not easy, or it just doesn't work out. But the thing about you saying like, oh, Ohio, not Ohio, sorry, I'm going to tell you something about Ohio, but the Midwest, like not having a culture. I have a sister that just moved out to Ohio, and so many people on social media make fun of Ohio. Like there's nothing there. There's nothing special. Like what in the Ohio? Like no. And my sister moved there and she loves it because she's from California. So for her, it's a total different atmosphere, a different vibe. She's like, the people here are friendlier. Like things are different here. She's all about the farm culture, the homesteading, the all of that. Like she loves it for her kids. They have 5 acres and her kids get to run around wild and free, which they didn't have here,
Yep.
So it's just so interesting how sometimes when you're from a place, sometimes you can't see what's great about that place, that the outsider will come in and tell you how great it is. And you're just like, are you crazy? In Argentina, when I lived there, people were like, why are you here? What
Yeah.
are you doing here? Like, you're from the
Yeah.
US,
I get
go
that
there
question
where
all
you
the
have
time.
everything wonderful. And I was like, you guys don't understand. I love Argentina. I love the culture here. And if it weren't for the safety issues, I would probably make my life there, And at some point, I'm sure I'm going to go spend longer periods of my life there. But I love it. And yeah, when you're from it, I think sometimes you can't see how great it is.
Yeah, and I think that I think it applies because, and something else that's kind of different as well is like, I'll talk to people who are immigrants in the United States or wherever it is, and we talk about our struggles as an immigrant, right? Because me living now that I live here, this is where I'm from. Well, not from, but this is where I've lived for a long time now. Let's say a long time, a couple of years. But I've had to live as an immigrant to Brazil, and I only recently kind of thought of that, because I was never in my mind. I was never like, oh yeah, I'm an immigrant. But I mean, we are, right? When you go to another country and you
Mm-hmm.
decide to live there, you have immigrated to that place. And what I think is interesting is that being an American immigrant is also different from being an immigrant to the United States. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so many people talk about that, or they'll talk to me because, as you know, a lot of people, the way that they see Americans outside of the United States is very different than how we see ourselves. And
Yeah.
and I didn't know that, and I would come here and people just expected me to be like this rich guy that doesn't understand pain, doesn't know what it's like to not have enough money for something or whatever it may be. And it made me sad because I was like, but you don't know me. You don't
Yeah.
know who I am. You don't know what I've been through. I was like, I know what
Yeah.
you see on the TV looks great, but don't worry. The
That,
United States has plenty of problems and plenty of issues that
yeah.
they'll show you. And
Yeah. No,
it's the
it's true. Wow. I can relate to that on many levels. I think when people leave the US, like they call them or we call them expats, you know? And then when people come to the US, they're immigrants, And I think the idea there, the way people categorize it is if you're coming for better opportunities because of where you're from, because of hardship, and so you're coming to the US, like you're an immigrant. But if you're in the US and you're just living there and you just choose to go live somewhere else, you're an expat. Like you're not going seeking better opportunities. But then that's not always the case because obviously it depends on everything, case by case basis.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I didn't have a privileged upbringing by any means. I mentioned my parents were immigrants and they came to the US with like next to nothing when they came. I was born, years later, but they still didn't have much when I was there. And like we were the family that would get donations, like food donations from local churches and just friends and family. My parents had 7 kids. We did not grow up in a fancy home. In fact, I shared a bedroom with 4 of my siblings, so we could talk all day about, like it's not what you see in TV shows. But
Uh-huh.
also I have to be careful because I mentioned that in the past to some people, I won't name names, and their response was kind of like, yeah, but that's not poor. Like I was like, yeah, I grew up poor. And they're like, nah, that's not
Well,
poor. You haven't seen what poor is. And I was
right.
like, oh my gosh, so now we're gonna compare
We're
like
gonna. It's the
who's more
whole.
poor? Is the poor trophy? Like who
It's
gets to be more poor?
Yeah, I understand that because I know people talk about those things all the time. It's like here in Brazil, there's an interesting discussion, and I ask people all the time what their opinions are on it because I guess I'm an instigator sometimes. I like to hear.
You're curious,
Yeah,
as am I.
I love to hear what people have to say, and I feel like I have enough self-control that if somebody says something that I disagree with, I'm okay to have the conversation about it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I always love asking the questions. And something here in Brazil that I've noticed, and I haven't really seen it in any other language because I've looked for it, is that here, when an American calls themselves an American, they don't
Mm-hmm.
like that because well, Brazil is part of South America and the United
Yeah.
States is part of North America. And so everybody is American. And in their language, they call us, I guess you would roughly translate it to like a United Stadian, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
And,
I've heard this, yeah, a lot too.
yeah.
And people have made this comment on my videos.
And I always think, I'm like, but because I've asked them why. I've asked them why it's so important. And because they always say, well, I'm an American too. And I was like, well, when's the last time that you called yourself an American, like outside of this discussion? And
Yeah, that's a good question.
usually the answer is never, because, here they're going to call themselves a Brazilian. And I say, also, what's the name of your country? Because here it's the Republic of Brazil. And so there's no America in the name. I was like, language wise, us calling ourselves Americans makes sense. But then on top of that, what they tell me is they feel like when Americans call themselves Americans, they're kind of like expressing that they own everything, if that makes sense. And I said, I almost wish that Americans were thinking that big when they call themselves Americans, but we really don't.
Yeah. A lot of Americans are not even giving a second thought to the rest of the world.
Exactly.
Quite honestly.
That's what I tell people. I was like, as sad as it is for me to say it, I'm like, they just don't care. Like they're not thinking about you when they call themselves. They're thinking about, I'm an American and these are the problems that Americans are going through. And that's usually what they're talking about.
I feel like there's so much to say on this topic, and really great question, because I've experienced it too. And it's almost like, whoa, like, why are you offended about this thing that, the Americans, people, they're not thinking of it like that at all. They're not thinking, I'm American. And because you're from South America, you're not American. Like, we're not claiming when we make that statement that we're from the Americas or that they belong to us. When I say I'm American, I'm specifically saying I'm from the United States of America. I'm not claiming that the Americas belong to me or us, and nor does anybody think like that. So I think this is one of those unfortunate cases where language gets in the way. Because we could just say estadounidense, what they say in Spanish, United Statesian, that wouldn't be a problem and nobody would get offended. But then you said in Brazil, they're called United Republic?
I think
that would be like
it's like the Republic of Brazil.
That would be like calling them a Republican.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? If you're going to call me a United Statesian, basically, then you're a Republican. It's just...
Yeah, and the name of Mexico is United States of Mexico.
Yeah, so they would also be estadounidense.
Yeah, so it's a United
States.
It's one of those things that, like you said, it's just a language barrier. And I think what's crazy, what I think is not crazy, but really outside, is that I'd never thought of that. Like living in the United States, that would have never came into mind. And living in Brazil, that's something that they just find. And I always tell them, I'm like, you do realize that we're not like, we don't think that we're better than you. I mean, Americans just are Americans and tend to think about themselves more than anything.
Yeah. And I think it's true, like the stereotype of like Americans don't really know what's going on in the world other than what they see on the news. It is so true. Like I didn't know much about Brazil until I went to Argentina, and then it became our bordering country. So then I learned more. But in the US, I knew quite a bit about Mexico because they were the bordering country. Where was I going with this? Shoot. I lost my idea, but it'll come back. But this is definitely an interesting conversation, and it's bothering me that I can't remember what I was going to say.
It's okay. Like we were talking about, that Americans tend to not really know what's going on. Oh yeah,
not really know what's going on. And so the thing is that who is watching Hollywood movies? The whole world. So of course the whole world is going to know about American culture. Are we watching Brazilian movies? Are we watching Argentinian movies? Are we watching Mexican movies? No, we're not. So we're watching American movies and maybe, movies from the UK, but very rarely do people watch foreign films and stuff like that. Yep. So that is why I think the whole world is kind of like one of the reasons why the whole world kind of has their eye on the US and knows more about the US than we know about them. And then they get offended when we don't know a lot about their country. And it's like, well, you're lucky that you have all these movies where you can get an inside insider's view into
Right.
our life because
We don't
we
know
don't
them.
have that, or we don't, or we do, but it's just not mainstream over here the way
Yeah.
Hollywood movies are mainstream around the world. So there's like this advantage, disadvantage that doesn't really ever get talked about, and a cultural norm. It's like so culturally normal to watch US movies around the world. It's not culturally normal in the US to watch foreign films.
Mhm. And it's
So
interesting that you bring that up, because I do tell people that a lot. I say, you know, culture-wise, I was like, the reason why American culture gets shared so much is just because of that. You have McDonald's, you have Burger King, you have all of these companies that go outside and they kind of expand. And, you know, economically, the United States is one of those bigger economies. And so they tend to be in more places. And what I think sometimes gets a little difficult for people, especially when people travel outside, is that you end up being the representative of your whole country to that one person. And so you almost get a little bit scared because you're like, I don't want them to think that all Americans are like this, or whatever it may be.
yeah,
So you're almost walking on eggshells the whole time, because you're like, that's not it's not
yeah,
Americans, but it's what I do. It's like, if you go around and you tell people, oh, I love purple Jello, like that's my favorite flavor of Jello, and then people all of a sudden are like, Americans love purple Jello, and you're like,
and
that's
and
not
this is it's such
true.
a human thing to do, to create
Yeah.
stereotypes. And this is something I was thinking about actually earlier today that we all have to be careful with. Experiences create beliefs. So if you have an experience, it's very likely that that will form part of your belief system. Again, like you said, you meet an American that likes purple Jello. Now you suddenly believe, without realizing it, that you think all Americans like purple Jello. Or, you had bad luck with men in life. So now you think all men are awful. Like these kinds of things, like you have an experience and it creates a belief. And then that belief will determine what you say, what you do, how you think, how you feel. So I'm the kind of person where it's like, yeah, I'm constantly reevaluating, where is this coming from? And why do I think this? And why do I
Mhm.
believe that? And then going back to the thing about Americans being the representative, I remember something that happened to me in Argentina in like my first trip. There was one of my husband's friends. Ooh, he did not like the US. And so the fact that I was from the US, every single time he saw me, he had to bring up some political something or other. And he'd be like, well, you guys, da 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 da. Well, you guys, the amount of times I had to hear you guys and like this with this tone. And finally I had to tell him, I'm like, look, I'm here. I'm standing right next to you on Argentine soil. Like I'm not over there. And a people and individuals are not their government. Like, yes, there's voices that get heard and what's it called? It represented in the government, but each person is an individual. And it's like, if we looked at now the Argentine people and thought that they were their government, they wouldn't be happy about that because, most of them aren't happy with the government. So we have to be really, really careful and sensitive and kind, and resist the urge to form these stereotypes and
Right.
treat people as individuals, like see people as mothers and fathers and husbands and wives and children and friends. And then we can sort of break down these mental barriers that divide people, because at the end of the day, that's the kind of thinking that divides people and eventually kills people,
Yep.
and that's not what I'm about. So
It's what leads to just arguments and a lot
hatred.
of just a lot of negative things and negative opinions. And like you said, because you can also think, like, I like that you said that, a lot of people who are from the place don't agree with what's happening there, just because, here in Brazil recently in their election, it was almost 50-50, pretty much like our election was last time as
Yeah.
well. And so when someone goes and they go, well, you're president, well, you're this, and you're like, look,
Yeah.
I'm not the one who made him who he is. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not personally responsible for everything that
Yeah.
happened. And there's a lot
Yeah.
of Americans that probably agree with you and probably disagree with you. And same with Brazilians and Argentinians and all these people that we like you said, we tend to group them into one and say, well, you guys, and we should.
Yeah. And so he did that. And then he also had the issue with why do you get to call yourself American? He had that whole conversation with me. And when I told him there's literally not a word in our language to say it any other way. And I'm sorry, like if knowing that this is such a point of contention for so many people, if I could wish this problem away, I would, just because I don't like issues. But I told him, literally in our language, we don't have another word. What do you want us to say? What do you propose we say? Because we don't have another way of saying it, unfortunately. And that kind of made him go, oh, I didn't even realize that. I'm like, yeah, you're seeing everything through the lens of your language. In your language, you have a different way of saying it. You can say americano or estadounidense, and in your language, americano, maybe it means a person from the Americas, but that's not what it means in English. And this is a huge problem with languages. Sometimes you think a word is like a true cognate, like this in this language means this in that language, and it doesn't. So you're associating, connotations that don't exist in the other language. So you have to put on your, American glasses. Sorry for saying it like that, right, but truly, we don't have another way of saying it. Put on your American glasses and try to understand English through that lens,
right,
without getting offended because of what a word might mean in your language.
And I think that leads into another question that I have for you as well, because one of my biggest tips that I give to my students for learning English is something that I started to do while I was learning Portuguese. Because what happens is here, these mission trips that we all do, what happens is we go on the mission trip. I would say after about a year, you speak pretty well. Obviously, there's a lot to learn, but you can communicate. You can do what you need to, and they stop studying. They always stop studying. And I was somebody who, we had talked before, were, competitive. I was always very competitive. And in my mind, it wasn't enough to be good. I wanted to be, I wanted to be that guy that when I spoke Portuguese, people looked at me and they were like, wow, he's American. Wow, he learned Portuguese. I wanted people to really see that I tried. So I studied every day until I went home. And one of the things that I did I think really made it different for me from others is one day I was talking with, we were talking about normal missionary stuff. I think we were talking about God and Jesus. And next thing you know, I saw a dictionary, and it was a school dictionary. It's this huge book. And I was like, that's really cool. Can I look at it? And she said, sure. And she gave me the book. I started looking at it and I was like, wow, this is great. Kind of seeing how you guys define your words, seeing what's the Brazilian definition of each of these words instead of seeing what the translation is. And it clicked for me. And I was like, wait. And then, I really liked looking at it. And I said, oh, that's great. And she's like, do you want to have it? And I was like, are you serious? And then she gave me this huge dictionary. I took it home and I never used the translation book dictionary ever again. I only used the Portuguese dictionary, and I started to read it. I learned how to pronounce the words through the dictionary. And I tell people, especially when they're studying with me, I say, when you study English and you have a good base, start using a dictionary instead of using the translator. Because the thing is there's words that we say that they're not very heavy. They don't have a huge significance when they say, but in Portuguese, the same word, when you translate it, can mean something very different. It can mean something very serious. And there's a lot of instances where that happens, where there's, the translation of the word is the same, but it doesn't mean the same thing. And so I always tell people that when you can learn through the dictionary, then you can learn the word the way that I learned the word, the way that I was able to pick it up. And then you understand it in a whole different context than just, instead of a door being a porta, it's, the porta is a whole different concept than a door. And you can understand what it means and the differences that there are. And so, like you were talking about with understanding words and things like that, and kind of putting on the American lenses, right? Or just putting on like an English view of how you're saying things. What kind of tips do you have? Like, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you have tips that have to stay within your program, and you can't share too many.
No, I share tips for free in my programs. Actually, I'll share this real fast. It's not about giving tips that I'm like guarding and they're secret, because I believe that like should be common knowledge. How to learn a language and the best ways to do it should be common knowledge. So I give that stuff away for free. My programs are more about structure. They're more about like, here, you're going to go through a system and you're going to have an experience where on week 1, this is the material you're going to study. This is the homework, and these are the objectives for the week. Like, this is what we're trying to help you achieve through this experience. But it's definitely not about learning the best way to learn, because as you were saying, I think before we hit the record button, like everybody has a different way, and what works for one person might not work for the other person. So yeah, I'll share something in a second, but I have to start by saying I love the tip that you just gave, and I've never heard anybody say it like that. And so whoever's listening, like, pay attention. He knows what he's talking about. He's speaking from experience, and here's why this is so powerful for me. It's powerful for me because I used to teach the exact opposite. I used to teach that way is not as effective because it wasn't as effective for me. When I would look up words in the Spanish dictionary, sometimes I would be more confused about a meaning than actually understanding it. Whereas if I would just look up the translation, I would just be, oh, that's what it is, you know? So then I developed this idea, right? Experiences create beliefs. So because it was hard for me, I projected that onto everybody, thinking it would be hard and bad for everybody. So then I started teaching, don't do it this way, do it this way. And people say do it like this, but they're wrong, you know? And I came to understand that, like you say, there's a place for everything. And I love that you gave that advice because it worked for you. And I actually think that it's really good advice. And I think that it would apply for the right type of learner. Like, if that's how you like learning, through the books, right? And through reading definitions, if that works for you, that's amazing. And you also have to have a really high level, I think, because when you encounter words you don't know in a definition, then you have to go look up those words. And then if you encounter words you don't know in that definition, so it creates this huge like rabbit hole of I still don't understand. And I think when I was trying that methodology, that's what happened to me. And that's why I was like, no, I don't like that. But I think your advice is super solid and amazing. And one thing I've learned as an English teacher is that sometimes we think we know what's best. And we're all out here trying to help students. We're all out here trying to give our knowledge and share the best that we know. But sometimes we're wrong. And that has been such an important lesson for me. Like, I used to teach things 7 years ago that I disagree with today. So that's good. It's good to experience growth as a professional and learn and stuff like that. So I guess as language learners, we should also be open to that. Be open to the fact, actually, this is good advice. Know that when a teacher is giving you advice, whether it's me or Samuel or anybody else, they're basing that on their experiences and their understanding. But every single human has a limited view and a limited understanding. So just be aware of that. And I think most advanced learners are, and they don't take what one teacher says as gospel. Like, that's also not good, because then that's like very cultish, right? To just believe only what one person says. I think it's really great that we have this atmosphere online where you can take from this teacher and you can take from that teacher, and you can, you know, as much as internally maybe I don't like the competition at times, you know, because I'm human. And I feel like that's the theme of this. Like, I'm human. And sometimes we don't like that person says something that goes against what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, it's like, I think everybody has some gems for you. And then there's going to be things where their ideas are underdeveloped or incorrect, or they're still learning. And so just be aware of that as a learner, and know that you can take a little bit from this person and a little bit from that person, and you can learn from multiple different people, and that's good. It's really good, because if not, like I said, you get caught up in cultish ideologies.
Yeah, and like you said, something else that I tell my students as well is that I always tell them, I say, I don't get offended if you watch somebody else's videos. If you like another teacher and you are following everything that they say, and, you know, but my idea I always tell them is just, you know, be open to everything, because like you said, and I think you said it very well, is that we're learning too. You know, I always tell people that a good teacher is also a good student. And so as students of English, even though we're native speakers, that doesn't mean that we know how to explain the way that we say things. It doesn't mean that we know how to explain why we use certain prepositions, or why we say this, why we say these, just because you're a native speaker. And so we need to, you know, we always need to be open to the idea that we're people, and hopefully we explain it the right way. But like you said, and if you follow a teacher long enough, you'll see them make corrections to certain things that they used to.
Yeah.
They don't do it anymore.
Yeah, that is true. And I've seen people do that online too, like teachers that I've followed, because it's like we all follow other people in the space to see what's being taught and how it's being taught and how can I do it, et cetera. And so, yeah, you do see people go through these evolutions, and it's really cool. And another really piece of bad advice I used to give. Sorry, this is supposed to be about good advice.
Hey, but
it'll be about good advice, but in reverse.
Yeah.
Another piece of bad advice I used to give was that using music to learn a language is not really that effective. And again, it's because I didn't do that. And so I was basing my advice off of my experience. And then you come and find students who are like, oh my gosh, I learned English through music. So you're like, wait a minute. If this person did it and that person did it, then clearly there's something here. And it just goes to show you there's many roads to Rome. That's what we say. There are so many roads to Rome. And there's many ways to get there. You have to know thyself, know what you like, know what you don't like, and then find people that you like learning from, and then go learn from them. But beyond that, some other advice that I generally give my audience based on where they are at is that it's not enough to consume English and read it every day and be around the language. You really have to produce it. You have to speak, you have to write, you have to communicate, you have to have real relationships with people where you want to talk, because then it pulls on this underlying interior motivation that is so strong, this desire to connect with people, that it no longer is about, oh, I'm practicing English. It's about, oh my gosh, how was your day today? Like, I haven't talked to you in a week. Like, I want to know what's going on. And you just start using the language. So you have to speak in order to improve. You have to communicate with other people, and then practice,
participate, right?
Yes, active. And then practice with other learners. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to practice with other learners. Like, they look down on their peers. And it's strange, because in what other field of study do we do this? If you go study to be a doctor, you are going to be going to study groups with your peers. You're not going to go to study groups with mentors and professors and teachers. You're going to study with your peers. So do that in English too. You will have a ready and willing partner who will speak to you at any point of the day just to practice English. And it's a lot less stressful. I remember I used to have this bias when I was in Argentina, and I did not want to talk to non-natives, and I wanted to only practice and study with natives. And I was always anxious about speaking because of my mistakes. Well, then I was in a class with a bunch of non-natives, and there was this girl from France, and she had a very thick French accent in Spanish, but she didn't care. And I admired how fluently she spoke, and how much she laughed, and how much she smiled, and how much fun she had speaking Spanish. And I was there with a better accent, better grammar, better everything, and I knew it, and I could not speak as fluently and joyfully as she spoke. So that was a huge learning lesson for me, where I was just looking at her going, I want what you have. And it's not that her language skills were better per se, it's just that she felt better in the language. And so then I started working on my mindset. And then when I would speak with her, it actually felt really good, because I was like, she's over here making mistakes. I can make mistakes. I can loosen up. I can let my hair down. I can feel relaxed and just enjoy the conversation rather than focus on speaking perfectly. And it helped me be me in the conversation. And so then the more I did that, the more I kind of unlocked that confidence that I was missing. Because yeah, a lot of people are like, they can check all the boxes, the grammar, the pronunciation, etc., but they can't check that confidence box. And that's sad, because you have everything except the confidence.
Yep.
So for that, you really have to work on your mindset and how you see yourself in the language, and your fear of making mistakes. A lot of these things are rooted in just plain old anxiety, and we go through, anxiety in many aspects of our lives, not just language learning. So yeah, it's something to look into if someone struggles with it.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's wonderful. I did a podcast with an English teacher who he lives in Japan. He's from the UK, but he's lived in Japan for I think like 7 years. And that was one of the things that he brought up too, is that he said it a little bit different, because he said that in Japan, a lot of his students, they tend to have the same problem with, before they start talking, they go, I just want to apologize for my English. I'm sorry, it's not good. And then they say there's things. And he said, don't do that. He said, don't ask for apologies. Don't say you're sorry, because he said, the reason he gave, I thought was interesting, because for me, it was always, about confidence. It was always been, you need to be confident and be happy. Try your best. I always tell people, they know whoever you're talking to, if they're native, they know you're not native, and they're not going to be like, oh, this is just so difficult. No, they're going to try and talk to you most of the time. But he said, if you say you're sorry, it makes people focus on your mistakes. He said, when you apologize, you say, my English is not very good. Well, you just told them what to look for whenever you talk to them. So they're going to notice more problems. They're going to notice more mistakes that they probably wouldn't have had you just started talking.
Yeah. It's like when you're going to give a presentation and you say, sorry, guys, I just threw this together last night. And now you're kind of stepping out on a negative foot where you could just wing it. And if we tell people what our insecurities are, they will know. Yeah. If you don't tell people, then they won't know. So we get to choose what level of insight we want to give people into our lives. So I would give the same advice. I used to, and I still do, for the most part. But then one time a student explained it to me, and I don't remember what they said, but I was like, whoa, I've never thought about it from that perspective before. And it was something along the lines of, I want to show them that I respect their time and that I understand they're going to make an extra effort now to understand me because of where I'm at with my link. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting.
A very respectful way to think of it.
Yeah, like I didn't consider it like that's not very American. Do you know what I mean?
Not at all.
but I understood that, and I was like, that's cool. And I'll throw in here some excellent advice that doesn't come from me. This comes from a teacher, Monica, from Argentina, who works with us on our team now. And I love this advice from her. So she said, when you're in a meeting and you have a bunch of, let's say, native speakers around you, or you're assuming or knowing most of them are native speakers, and you have to present or talk or whatever, lead a discussion, you can quickly ask people, does anybody here speak Spanish? Or whatever your language is. Does anybody here speak Japanese? And when everybody confirms, no, I don't speak that. Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to make an effort here to explain all of this to you in English, and it just changes how things are positioned, because instead of, oh, sorry for my English, and it's like, does anybody here speak this language that I speak fluently? Is it okay if I give this presentation in this language? Oh, no. Oh, you guys don't speak that language? Okay, then you know what? I'll make an effort here and I'll do it in English. And it's kind of like, now it sets you kind of like at a higher level, because you've got this, the presentation isn't the issue. You're able to do this perfectly, and you already speak a language, and now you're going a step above everybody else, to go meet them where they are at. And I was like, well, that's powerful.
Yeah, instead of saying like, oh, I don't know English, you're like, well, I could do this in Spanish, but since you don't speak Spanish, I'm going to do it in English. Yeah. Like, oh, wow, they're going to speak a second language for me.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes
go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, it's just about positioning. It's good old marketing, good old positioning, and
learn how to sell yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, exactly.
No, good. Very great. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, but I have loved our conversation. It's been very fun, and I imagine that we could probably give a lot more information, a lot of details, and just a lot of good things it's nice to talk to someone who has lived a lot of similar experiences, from going to another country and kind of going through that process. Also kind of, I think something that I always tell people is that I really hope that in the future, more people from the United States become invested in learning another language for themselves as well, just because it opens it opens so many doors. It gives much more culture to how and I think you start to understand that, it's like whenever you see those memes where they're like in apocalyptic movies, when the world's going to end and it just shows the United States, and it's like that's where the aliens are going to go, and that's not the case, right? We have a whole world to explore, and it's just been wonderful talking to you. And talking to everybody else, just remember that Stephanie is pretty much everywhere, and you can find her and content, and I really enjoyed it. Do you have anything that you would like to say before we finish?
I think that for those of you learning English, right? And I'll just say this, like, I think that the hardest language you ever learn is the second language, or the language you learn sort of as an adult. That's the hardest language. And then once you achieve that, once you get fluency in that language, and you can keep improving, but basically once you unlock your fluency, any other language you want to learn after that, I think becomes so much easier. Like, it was so hard for me to learn Spanish, and now I understand quite a bit of Portuguese and quite a bit of Italian. And, I'm absorbing languages now because I understand how to learn languages. And I've also removed a lot of the roadblocks that people have when they're not sure how to think about a language or learn it. So I guess just everyone just keep going in your journey and find your identity. Like, I guess that's one of my messages for today. Like, truly, truly find your identity and know that there's a lot of moving parts to an identity, and identities shift and change and evolve. And that's wonderful. So if you're from a country, but now you live in the US or something like that, it's like you can embrace US culture. You can embrace English. You can let that form part of your identity, and it doesn't take away from anything that you were before or could become. It's just adding to it. It's not taking anything away. And I really enjoyed this conversation too, Samuel. I think we got into some discussions I wasn't expecting, but I love them. And I'm kind of interested to know what everybody is going to think. So if there's a way to comment on this or whatever, leave your comments, because I feel like we talked about some touchy subjects, but we also really opened up to share our perspective. And that's always important, to see, okay, the people that are affected by this or whatever, like, what do they think about this, or how does it affect them? So that's really cool. And then, yeah, of course, if anybody wants to check out any of my stuff, basically I go by Stephanie, the English coach, online. And then my website is englishfulltime.com. And I try to create videos, helpful videos and content for students. And then our courses, like I said, they're just more structured programs for intermediate and advanced learners. And it's not the DIY, do it yourself, like, here's a course and go have fun with it. They're really structured programs. So it's like week 1, week 2, week 3, we have 12-week programs for different things, pronunciation, vocabulary, improving all of your English, different things like that.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Once again, thank you, Stephanie, for coming on the show, and just being, having a great, a great sense of humor, just a great attitude towards the conversation. So I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody else for listening to us. And like she said, if you have any comments, if you have anything, please don't hesitate, comment, let us know what you think. And who knows, maybe in the future, if Stephanie wants to, she can come back and maybe
I think that would be fun.
So yeah, we can, like I said, thank you everybody. Thank you, Stephanie, and everybody have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time on Bled Talk. Thank you for listening to Bled Talk. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more content. We are on all of the popular podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and we're even on YouTube. Don't forget to send in your questions and your suggestions. Thank you once again, and have a great day.